Okay. So cardiovascular diseases are the leading cause of death among women in the United States. However, cardiovascular disease disproportionately affects African American women compared to women of other races. Vascular dysfunction is a non-traditional risk factor for the development of cardiovascular disease and is mainly characterized by reductions in the vasoactive molecule nitric oxide. So vascular dysfunction has also been proposed as a mechanism contributing to the elevated cardiovascular disease risk in African American women. Macrovascular function assessed by flow-mediated dilation is significantly reduced in premenopausal African American women compared to Caucasian women. However, a majority of these studies have either been restricted to the low hormone phase of the menstrual cycle or have not accounted for the menstrual cycle altogether. Premenopausal women are cardioprotected by the female sex hormone estrogen, since estrogen receptors on the vascular endothelium allow estrogen to directly increase nitric oxide bioavailability. In premenopausal women, estrogen fluctuates throughout the menstrual cycle, which is why research in premenopausal women is often restricted to the low hormone or early follicular phase. However, as you can see here, the early follicular phase only encompasses the first 7 days of each menstrual cycle, which is limiting to the characterization of the true vascular function of premenopausal women. Therefore, the purpose of the present study was to compare nitric oxide-mediated peripheral microvascular function across 3 phases of the menstrual cycle between naturally cycling premenopausal African American women and Caucasian women using passive leg movement. We hypothesized that peripheral microvascular function would fluctuate across the menstrual cycle in relation to fluctuations in estrogen, but would be attenuated in African American women compared to Caucasian women at each menstrual phase. The passive leg movement technique is an assessment of nitric oxide-mediated peripheral microvascular function, which can be evaluated as either change in leg blood flow or leg blood flow area under the curve, as seen in the figure on the bottom right. So after the informed consent visit, passive leg movement was performed at 3 distinct phases of the menstrual cycle. Visit 2 occurred during the early follicular phase, visit 3 occurred during the ovulation phase, and visit 4 occurred during the mid-luteal phase. For our statistical analyses, independent samples t-tests were used to compare group characteristics, and then a mixed design 2-way repeated measures ANOVA was used to compare group differences in PLM variables across the menstrual cycle between groups, and then post hoc analyses were performed where appropriate. So 15 Caucasian women and 11 African American women completed the protocol for the study and were well matched for age, BMI, blood pressure, physical activity, and clinical blood measures. And the groups were also well matched for cycle length and then the timing at which each visit took place throughout the menstrual cycle. For illustrative purposes, these figures demonstrate the second-by-second leg blood flow response to passive leg movement at each menstrual phase. Caucasian women are shown in the open gray circles, and African American women are shown in the black circles. And specifically at the early follicular and ovulation phases, the hyperemic response to passive leg movement is visually attenuated in the African American women compared to the Caucasian women. This figure shows the change in leg blood flow at each menstrual phase for both groups, and this was significantly attenuated in the African American women compared to the Caucasian women at the early follicular and ovulation phases of the menstrual cycle. And this second figure shows the overall hyperemic response to passive leg movement, quantified as leg blood flow area under the curve, and this was significantly attenuated in African American women at the ovulation phase of the menstrual cycle. However, contrary to our hypothesis, peripheral microvascular function was unchanged across the menstrual cycle phases for both groups. And so to conclude, peripheral microvascular function assessed by passive leg movement is stable across the menstrual cycle for both Caucasian women and African American women. And similar to previous studies, African American women experience significantly attenuated peripheral microvascular function at the early follicular phase of the menstrual cycle. However, the present study newly demonstrates that this disparity extends into the ovulation phase. These findings demonstrate the need to assess vascular health beyond the early follicular phase of the menstrual cycle. And these findings also encourage future research on the vascular implications of estrogen in young African American women to better understand the racial disparity observed within these data. And so thank you for your time. I will now take any questions.